Welcome to the Prison Professors Podcast. We serve people who face challenges with prosecution, sentencing, and prison. My co-founders are Sean Hopwood and Justin Paperny. My name is Michael Santos. We create digital content and our team offers individual consulting services. We also assist agencies that want to improve outcomes. To learn how we can help you, text the word Prison Pro to 44222. Again, text Prison Pro to 44222 and get our free brochure. You can also visit us at prisonprofessors.com or contact Justin at 818-424-2220. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Send confirmation that you reviewed our podcast and we'll send you a free digital book. Stay tuned for a 20 to 30-minute episode of Prison Professors. Welcome to the Prison Professors program. I am Michael Santos. Today we are going to speak with Brad Rouse, who has had a really a career that is different from what many people would expect that might ever expose him to the criminal justice system. And one of the things that we like to do is learn from people from every background, every profession, because I know that we have a lot to learn from them. So Brad, I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about your background before you went into the prison system.
Great, I'd be happy to. I grew up in Missouri in a suburb of St. Louis. I have a wonderful family, supportive parents, good educational opportunities. I got to Harvard University. I graduated there with honors, got a top arts prize.
Well, hold on, slow down. That's pretty impressive right there. You went to Harvard as what did you study at Harvard?
I got an English degree, but I always had an interest in the theater. So I spent most of my time directing and producing plays. And
so how old were you, Brad, when you started focusing on really advancing your career to the extent, your academic career, that you would start, singling in on one of the best Ivy League universities in the world?
Well, both of my parents were very focused on their own education. They'd both gone to a good university and focusing on school. The house was really about kind of Episcopalian love and doing well in school. And I was just, a Boy Scout and a choir boy, and my parents really just encouraging me to do as much academic achievement as possible.
So you go to Harvard. You said you majored in English literature. Tell us about the rest of the journey.
Harvard was a great place for me. I mean, coming from a suburb in Missouri, I didn't quite understand all the dynamics that were in play, especially with regards to like wealth and power and that kind of stuff. But I went there and tried to maximize the opportunities to learn. I met a lot of, great, talented, exciting people. It was a beautiful place to go. And I'm really incredibly grateful for the chances for all the opportunities it gave me.
What were the career opportunities that opened for you after graduating from Harvard? And when did you graduate?
I graduated in 1995. I was always like shot out of a cannon. Like in the middle of college, I took a year off, went to London, and in 2 months had met Prince Charles and was working for the producer of the Beatles. And, I shot out of a cannon when I got to New York. And within a few weeks, I was working for Hal Prince, who was the legendary producer of like Fiddler on the Roof and West Side Story. He directed Phantom of the Opera. Anytime I set my heart on something, within a few weeks, I found myself at the center of things. Unfortunately, that also happened once I tried drugs.
When did you get started with drugs?
Well, it was 2005. I'd come off a series of traumas, one of which was looking out my window when the first plane hit the tower on 9/11. The tower's the view from my apartment. And although there's no direct causality between that trauma and my addiction, I definitely had PTSD. And with PTSD, the kind of anger and the rage and the fear and the shock just erased a lot of boundaries that had always been in place for me. And trauma, the way I experienced it, was like an injury to my thinking. And suddenly, risk-taking and issues with sex and substance abuse that just were off limits to me for my entire life. Just those boundaries were erased. And I sort of dove headfirst into it.
What were you doing as a career between 1995 when you graduated Harvard and 2005 when you started with drugs?
I was working for Hal Prince as his associate director and line producer. So producing plays and musicals, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Stephen Sondheim and Carol Burnett on Broadway, Lincoln Center, the National Theater in Washington, D.C., Kennedy Center, the Goodman Theater in Chicago, all over the country, plus doing things of my own, directing at the Public Theater in New York, City Center. I'd been on CBS 60 Minutes 2, interviewed by Scott Pelley for work that I had done in New York. So I really was working hard, often 6 days a week, 18-hour days, and really focused on the task at hand.
And how does your how did your venture into drug abuse or drug use influence that career?
Oh, it erased it. I mean, as soon as the injury to my thinking, which with the trauma, I mean, I started having little flashes of anger, the ways in which I'd been totally reliable in the past. I started, slipping up. And then once alcohol and drugs took over, I was just sort of erased myself from that scene. And so it had a, dramatic effect.
And then eventually you came to the attention of the Department of Justice eventually the Bureau of Prisons. How did that occur? What happened?
Well, once I started using drugs, I just, because it was all new to me. And I thought, well, I'll just try everything. And I essentially just sat in my apartment and went online and just found drugs everywhere. And drugs for me.
You found drugs online?
Sure. I mean, drugs are always a click away, or not necessarily, but people, connections. Certainly in the world of sort of gay men in New York City, there's quite an extensive network to obtain illegal substances, and I found myself in the middle of it.
So you were looking for those connections and drugs online, and eventually you came to the attention of law enforcement. Walk us through that experience.
Well, I essentially didn't leave my apartment for about 11 months, and people were here, and sort of word got out, I suppose. A friend of mine had been arrested in an airport and passed my name along, and next thing I know, I've got DEA piling through the door. I'm sort of pinned into my kitchen as they tear apart my apartment. And look, I was definitely ignoring the drug laws. And under the law, they did their duty and followed procedures in the law. And I don't have any anger and resentment towards the men who were doing their job that day. But it was traumatic. It was shocking, and it was life-changing.
Well, why was the DEA involved? Were you selling drugs as well as using drugs?
They were just sort of I wasn't in business, but what happened was. Drugs sort of started occupying the seat of food. And I'm like, well, I need as much food as possible. There should be enough for everybody. And I had a kind of circle of friends, sort of lost boys, people that had fallen through the cracks of the daytime world and sort of were up at night. And there were stacks of drugs here. And there was it became a bit of a hub. And for, a circle of what felt like friends to me. And I just got kind of carried away. But during that period, I was only sleeping 2 or 3 nights a week. I was really just out in orbit, and where, my behavior was not rational or wise, for sure.
What kind of drugs were at the house, Brad?
Probably the day of the arrest, there was almost not heroin, not opioids, but there was meth, there was cocaine, there was GHB, there was ketamine, there was LSD, there was pot, there was ecstasy, there were, little bits of everything. Not all in big quantities, but just, it was such an eccentric situation that, I just became something that was talked about. And the DEA, which has, a deep, it pays attention to illegal substance abuse, got my name, and that friend who had been arrested came into my house with a wire, and the rest is history.
Well, it's not there. You had some more experiences that followed that I think will be of big interest to our listeners. After the DEA did they take you into custody? And if so, what transpired?
Well, they took me over to MDC Brooklyn. First, I went to the emergency room and sort of got medically cleared because I, was running a fever and was really not well and been up for a few days, but then took me to MDC Brooklyn, which is really an extraordinary facility. It's very tough. It's a maximum security federal jail. And there I was.
What was it like for you going into a federal detention center in Brooklyn, a detention center that holds people from every security level, whether it's you're there for forging postage stamps or there for murder? What was it like going into that environment?
It was very shocking for me because also I'm coming down off meth, I'm coming down off benzos, I'm coming off of, almost a year straight of substance abuse and addiction. And so coming down off those drugs with a pretty bad infection going on, it was like being in another planet. I mean, it really was like the ninth ring of hell. I mean, I was confused. I was disoriented. I didn't know what to make of anything. And in those first few days, I probably looked like a lunatic.
But that was just the first day. You then would have had judicial proceedings that followed. Did you have counsel? Did they provide a federal defender? How did you go through the judicial process? I
was arraigned. Then I was given bail, but then I violated with failing drug tests. And so I was put there during the course of the judicial proceedings and ended up there for an entire year in one of their dorm units in the old building. There were 120 guys there. It was during 2008. And it's one room, no outside, no yard, light, fluorescent lights on 24/7, very loud because it's 120 people speaking every language on earth. My first night on that unit, I was up on a high bunk in the middle of the room, and my ears couldn't even pick out any English in this big mass of sound. 120 guys in various moments of distress. I mean, there was one person who might be getting out the next day, one person who might be up for the death penalty, sharing a bunk 3 feet apart. This incredibly dramatic, men from all over the world, every continent, every language, every religious tradition. I mean, for most of the time I was in a row, mostly Muslims. There were the Hindu, there was a Buddhist, there were Jewish, there were Christians, there were Catholics, there were evangelicals. It was such a fascinating place to be once I had adjusted, although it took me many months to adjust to the constant noise. There were times there was no heat, times there was no air conditioning, and the pressure. Some people haven't been in that room for 7 or 8 years. Some people just rolling in for a few weeks as they're in transit from one point to the next, going out for sentencing. Someone's mother dies, someone's baby gets born, someone gets a divorce, all packed together in that single space was a fascinating, stressful, terrible, amazing experience.
So you said that you were out on bail and then you got, they violated you because you violated the terms of that bail. How long were you out before they violated you?
It was a few months. So the time frame isn't totally clear to me, but it was a few months.
But you were only in for a year. Did the government drop the charges after that year?
No, I pled to them. I mean, I definitely ignored the law and I just came clean. And
so the sentence was only a year. They gave you time served, or what happened?
That's right. Time served.
Okay.
At my sentence, and because in the federal system, sentencing can often come after the, I was sentenced after my year.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the judicial proceedings that followed while you were out on bail and you got violated. So the first day you came in, you went and you were arraigned and they issued you a bail. And then what terms did they put on you when they let you go?
There were sort of geographic terms, but the main term was that I couldn't use any substances. And so I went in for urine tests and I failed a lot of them. I mean, one of the, and this is totally my responsibility, but, they left a lot of drugs in my apartment, so they came in and they left a lot behind and they sent me back after a very shocking, traumatic experience. by myself to a apartment where there's a lot of drugs sitting around. So, I mean, I used them and failed urine tests and
multiple tests, you said. So did you fail
multiple tests? Oh, no, many. I mean, I don't know, probably 3 or 4.
But what I'm asking is that if after you failed one, did they counsel you or did they say,
I sent to a rehab in upstate New York. I mean, So there were various states. What I'm trying to get at and understand for people who may be going into the system is you get out, and if you revert to drug use, the first time they don't put you back in prison, it sounds like you had to fail a few urine tests. Yeah, I mean, I would say to anyone, I just didn't really snap out of the shock of it until way too late. And I was sort of alone. And my whole social universe, I mean, it was such a pariah at that point. My family was in St. Louis. I was so ashamed at the situation I was in that I just didn't know how to ask for the help that I needed. And I didn't quite have a messenger, either anyone in the system or anyone in my community, that could just look me in the eye and snap me out of that trauma where all I wanted to do was obliterate myself and get high. I couldn't handle it at the shock of the negative emotion. And that really put me in a very vulnerable position under the terms of my bail agreement.
Yeah, the sooner somebody learns to begin turning a new leaf and recognize that they can start climbing their way out from struggle and into prosperity, the better off they are. And I'm hoping that some people who listen to this podcast will learn from you, Brad. But tell us a little bit about going back into the prison system. When you went in the second time, it wasn't a total shock to you because you'd been there before and you knew what you were going into. And I'm curious, as a gay man, what challenges did you face going into that environment?
That really wasn't an issue. I mean, especially on the dorm unit. I mean, there really isn't any. I didn't see any kind of inappropriate behavior like that. I mean, there was no privacy. My sexuality was just simply not an issue. You know,
okay. That's surprising. A lot of other people who go into that environment face more challenges, and I'm curious whether there was an adjustment that you used that worked really well for you that kept it from being a problem. Or was it really so not an issue at all that you didn't even notice? It was no different from living in the city.
Well, I had to make an adjustment. I mean, it's not something that I spoke about. It's not something that I shared about. It's not something that sort of was part of my life there. And I was really focusing on just making the kinds of connections. Like I went right to the group of Christians that met every night to sing some songs. And there were pastors that came in and I just sat and listened to make other connections. The other thing for me is that I speak Spanish. And so I was able to make social connections with the Spanish speakers. But there are people from all over the world. So I was just focusing on surviving by hearing stories, listening to people, because there were not everyone who's ignored the law or anyone who's had a lowest moment, even if it was violent, is that moment forever. I mean, there is a way to kind of take a 180 and say, well, just because I was busy being a drug addict doesn't mean that lowest time has to define me forever. And by talking to the people that seemed loose, I mean, there were guys in there that were playing dominoes and laughing and singing, and I just kind of focused on the people that seemed to have adapted to survive instead of going to the people that seemed sort of tortured with misery and angst. Even though I felt every
bit of critical thinking skills to survive that type of environment, and it sounds like you have very good ones. How did your experience of being in prison influence your life when you concluded that sentence?
I would say now, I mean, this is 10 years on. Now I can really feel grateful for what I learned in there. It really helped me do a kind of a 180 in my thinking, and I'm at long-term sobriety now. I'm able to feel grateful for the life that I have. And I haven't quite gotten on my feet, professionally yet, but in terms of my connection to my neighbors, I really needed that year. I mean, I'd been so traumatized, not just by the criminal justice experience, but by the years before. I had gone so deep into an addiction that in some ways it was a transformative experience that although wasn't instant, as I sit here today, I'm very grateful for the good things that came of that and for the strength and the courage. I'm afraid of nothing now. I have a better attitude kind of spiritually. I feel like a human being on planet Earth for the first time. And there were ways in which it strengthened me.
The takeaway for me on that is that it's been 10 years. And you said that despite having a Harvard education, a very successful career in the arts prior to your imprisonment, 10 years have passed, and you said that you're not quite there, or you've not yet recovered professionally yet. Tell us about some of the challenges that you have faced in recalibrating your career.
Well, for the people who say the Harvard degree is great, they get really thrown off by the felony. For the people that don't mind the felony, get really thrown off by the Harvard degree. Somehow those two pieces of paper at the same time are hard to reconcile. And also in the theater, that my earlier positions as being the director, where I was the person in charge, it's harder to give that kind of responsibility to somebody with the record that I have. And I understand that. It's something that I don't resent that fact. I mean, I do have a show.
Yeah, and yet you're public about it. You're willing to come and speak with us so that we can inspire and educate other people who are going through the challenge. You're not afraid, even though you know that this is a challenge. Tell us why you would do that, Brad.
Look, I didn't take jail. I took it seriously, but not too personally. It was a low moment, and the lowest moment in life. It was like a 180 for me, and I was able to I was like just on autopilot, just annihilating myself with anger, with fear, with drugs, really on a crash course. And jail was a turning point for me. And I'm lighter now. And I think that 180 is possible. I'm not my lowest moment. Whatever the government wrote down about me, that's not who I am.
That's a good point. And that's a situation for everybody. We all make a choice every day of who we are going to be. And regardless of what bad decisions we've made in the past, we can start making better decisions. What are the better decisions that you started making besides abstaining from drugs and alcoholism? What are some of the better decisions that you made after you came home that started you climbing a path toward this level place that you're at right now?
Well, it took me a while just to readjust to life on the outside. I mean, I hadn't seen anything move faster than a person walking. I mean, even just getting the cab out of the courthouse, I got car sick. To adjust to that environment with all that noise and no outside, it was months before I even felt like a person again. But connecting with my neighbors, finding the neighborhood fellowship, for me, it was at a church, it was in a 12-step program, but connecting with people who had survived a trauma, survived addiction. And there's so much wisdom on the other side of your lowest moment. There's so much wisdom after you take that 180. Somehow that kind of suffering can be turned into a gift. And there are people everywhere. It doesn't just have to be jail. It can be being all kinds of things that take people to dark places. And I found my neighbors who had their version of that experience, and I stuck with them. I see them every day. And being with other trauma survivors, being with people who did that total 180 in their life, doing the exact opposite of what they'd done the week before, was an attitude change. And for me, that was life-giving. I could stay connected to my family, my brother's children. I really went to where I was going to feel spiritually healthy, and really had to work on letting go of resentment and anger and fear, and that was essential to my adapting to this new reality where there's no going back from that experience totally. So I had to adapt to survive and focus on what I could give back, how I could be of service, how I could help the next person at their lowest moment. I mean, that's the greatest gift that I have now. is being with someone at their lowest moment and being able to just say, help talk them through it. And, I was able to talk to a class of corrections officers because there were a handful of people who worked at that jail. Now, some of them, there was some abuse of power, but many of them, and one I'm still friends with, there were some great people who were doing their duty by putting on that uniform and doing that job. And I'm able to talk to corrections students about my view of things, been involved in the Arts for Justice program at John Jay School of Criminal Justice. And now my passion is what they call narrative change, helping kind of adjust that story. So people who are drug war survivors, people that have survived mass incarceration, people that come out of a lowest moment have a path forward and know that the world wants them back. Their neighbors want them back. Their communities want them back.
What are you doing now to earn a living?
Well, the good news is I have a new off-Broadway musical that's about to be announced and will be playing off-Broadway starting in about 2 months. I'm able to get some teaching gigs, some coaching gigs. I have no long-term plan other than taking it a day at a time first to stay sober is my first goal and trying to build a new life. And I think there are new winds of change blowing. I'm very optimistic for how we can adjust the story moving forward and bring hope to people that have come through jail, show them a place in a future, because we need everybody.
And there's a lesson to learn from everybody. And today we've been learning lessons from Brad Rouse, an individual who had an Ivy League education and a very successful career in the arts and in New York City and around the United States, but yet still found himself inside of the Bureau of Prisons. Yet that is not what defined Brad. Rather, it's the way that he responded to those traumatizing times. I've taken a lot away from your story, Brad, and I hope that our listeners do as well. What's really important is to recognize that even though you get through prison, there are still challenges to face when you get to the other side. And Brad has found success, it sounds like, by really working on himself and recognizing the power that comes from helping others. And I just want to thank you for taking this time to speak with us today, Brad. We've come to the end of this episode. Maybe you have some final words of wisdom for people who are going into the criminal justice system or people who are there right now. What advice might you give them so that they can develop that type of positive attitude that has been serving you so well?
I'm stumped. I'm stumped on a quick say.
It's okay, but the reality is, Brad, is that we all face struggle. Sometimes, in the case of your life, it was going through the prison system. In my life, it was going through the prison system. But as you've mentioned, we meet many people out here who struggle with they've gotten divorced, they've had a financial reversal, they've lost a child, and that can feel like a prison. But there's always a pathway through. What has worked for me, and I think what I heard is working for you, is to recognize that the world is bigger than any one of us. And the more that we can contribute to the lives of others, the more we can build our own strength and manage the struggle with our dignity intact, recognizing that we can climb our way through. And that's what you have done. And I would just like it if you could give our audience, our members, the people who are listening to this, they're in struggle right now. And I think the more people we can hear from that have been able to overcome it, the more confidence that they have.
I think if I could talk to myself in those initial weeks when I was locked up and when it just felt like the end of the world. And I wish I could say to myself, it feels like the end of the world, but it's not the end of the world. So don't act like it's the end of the world. That feeling of despair and trauma and shock, that's a feeling, not a fact. And feelings are like bad weather in the brain. Feelings pass. They don't come to stay. They sometimes pass. Seek out the people who seem like they have some serenity, some wisdom, gravitate towards the light and walk back out, because there's love in every neighborhood. There's hope in every city. Every community will want you back, and will want you back fully with an open heart and feeling as at peace as you can, because that feeling was very dark and lasted for a long time. But it didn't stay. It was a Category 5 hurricane in my brain, but it did pass, and the sun does come out again.
Thank you very much. We've been listening to Brad Rouse, a director of the arts, and we can learn from the arts. We can learn from his personal story, just like we could learn from your personal story. On behalf of my two partners, Sean Hopwood and Justin Vapurny, I am Michael. I want to thank everybody. I am Michael with Prison Professors. If you'd like to learn more about how we strive to inspire and educate people who are going through the criminal justice system, please text Prison Pro to 44222 or visit us at prisonprofessors.com. Brad, I want to thank you again for spending this time with us. We'll be back tomorrow with another inspiring guest. Thank you.